I think the cold, hard realities of Brexit are certainly beginning to sink in on the British side. And I'll give you an example, and that's probably best seen by the smaller businesses who have been very badly affected by the overnight change in trade rules from the 31st of December. There's new paperwork, there are new rules, there's a rush to secure delivery space, causing widespread delays and extra cost. And I think we have seen the figures. The UK exports to the EU have fallen by a shocking 41% in January, according to government figures. So certainly there's been a bit of a wake-up call from the British side. From the European side, the overarching issue and the tensions with regards to vaccine rollout, I think, have complicated relationships with Britain. There's a very real sense that Britain is winning in this area, although it's not strictly speaking to do with Brexit. But I think the tensions between the two sides have very much magnified their inability to cooperate.
And Karel Lannoo, the same question to you. Who are the winners and the losers?
I think both are losers. I mean, we had better stay together and it would have been beneficial for both. And Amy mentioned these figures which have been going around, let's say, about the reduction in trade from the UK to the EU. I don't know about the figures from the EU to the UK, but I think it will be more or less similar. At least I know it for Belgium, let's say, that the trade exports to the UK have gone down as both sides have to adjust to the new rules. So I would say we're basically in a lose-lose situation, and that's what you see reflected politically, that the kind of the rhetoric on both sides is growing. As basically they see it's not a good situation for the economy. But of course we have the health situation where the UK has clearly done better. And apparently that's due because the person in charge and those which have negotiated the deal have been much tougher in negotiating with the pharmaceutical sector than we have done on the European side. And the EU has taken far too much responsibility in a subject which is not her responsibility, which is a subject for the member state, for every state.
And Professor Hadfield, is the EU bungling its vaccine rollout? And is that down to a lack of ability or because the EU is too big?
I think in many ways it's done very well to nail down a champion with Pfizer-BioNTech, for example. But what has been problematic is getting a program that works, whether it's regional distribution managed by the European Commission in a top-down template, or whether it's within each of the countries on a regional basis. And for the longest time, there was disagreement. At the same time, we have to remember, that it is beginning to pick up pace now. It's sort of 6 or 7 weeks behind perhaps where the UK itself was. But the EU has in fact actually been exporting vaccines using the COVAX regime to developing countries, to countries that still have not been able to produce vaccines of their own. So I think from the humanitarian perspective, actually is probably doing better than Britain. But I would agree with Karel. I think the COVID rhetoric has really worsened what was already a very perilous and damaged relationship between the two sides. So the sooner the two get talking to each other, the better.
Karel Lannoo, do you think the bungling and the delays and cooperation turning to competition has done any long-term reputational damage to the European Union?
Well, I don't think so. It was to be expected, and we've seen it for the last basically 5 years, let's say, how this rhetoric has been on both sides. Don't forget, we have concluded an agreement at the end of December. It was not expected until a few days before. By the way, in financial services, which is an extremely important export product for the UK, a MOU, a memorandum of understanding, was concluded at the end of March, so only a few days ago, which is also seen to be important. And even there, let's say, there has been some loss of jobs, but not that much as some people expected there would be. So London remains, and the UK remains, an extremely important financial center, will continue to export financial products. And there, of course, unlike goods, I mean, the restrictions are less visible, less difficult, more difficult to put in place.
And Professor Hadfield, this is Karel Lannoo saying basically this is a period of adjustment and no long-term damage yet. But what about financially? How is the euro faring against the pound? How is the pound faring against the euro?
Yeah, I would slightly disagree. I think Brexit's been very bad for the City of London. And I think, given it's the capital's financial district, something needs to happen quite quickly in order to be able to kind of roll back that damage. Thousands of jobs have already been lost and billions of euros worth of financial assets have left London. They were leaving them in the last 18 months. Specifically in financial assets, banking and insurance for the most part. And this is because, exactly as Karel said, the Brexit withdrawal agreement preserves free trade between the EU and the UK for goods, but not for services. So the passporting requirements, the ability for Britain to be able to work within the Eurozone and to have access to EU financial markets simply isn't on the cards at this point. Happily, though, a common framework is on the cards. That's going to be needed. But what I'm hoping is that financial framework is going to be full-blooded and not too thin. It's going to have rules and allowing things like professional qualifications for both sides.
But
not just
the markets
sort of
seem to like all this because, Karel Lannoo, the pound is getting stronger and stronger against the euro.
Yeah, that's probably a bit contradictory situation. Let's say that we've seen, I mean, the UK adapting, at least in the view of the markets, the UK adapting to this new situation. We've seen some important mergers. We've seen also extremely important financial market activity in the domain of IPOs, mergers and acquisitions. That's one thing, which of course, which benefit a financial center like London. But also, don't forget, let's say that the days or the weeks before, I mean, when the deal was announced at the end of December, there started to be expectation, let's say, that could blow up. So the pound sterling was at one of its lowest levels, let's say, for almost years. So it's basically an adjustment of the exchange rate that, finally they are coming to a new normal situation. And the current rate should probably a bit more accurately reflect what is in there for the UK economy. Also, don't forget, let's say, the unemployment figures in the UK are not that bad. So the economy is doing well, but probably thanks to a lot of spending by the government.
But I'm wondering whether, because of what's happened with the UK and EU and the strength of the UK at the moment, in inverted commas, would that perhaps suggest other countries in Europe might be looking at a possible Brexit or looking at the UK's example?
I think, the European Union is very, very aware that Brexit cannot set a precedent. And this is one of the reasons why it attained really very impressive unity in negotiating and prevented effectively the UK from trying to ring around the national capitals and divide and rule using the member states, and insisted that it had to go through the EU institution as a whole. I think what has been demonstrated, as Karel said, right at the beginning, membership matters. There are losers on both sides here. And the EU has, worked hard to demonstrate that Britain is not winning by virtue of what it has had to attempted to negotiate with the.
It's not winning because of Brexit, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think so. It could have attained a whole lot more. But the European Union, I think, was also very, very punitive. It could not afford to show other member states that leaving is a benefit in any sense. It had to be an incredibly painful, sad, and somewhat, bruise-making process.
All right, Karel Lannoo, are the voices, we're hearing more of the adverse voices from the south of Europe and certainly the east of Europe?
I wouldn't fear too much of it. You have to see that those where you should fear are what they call the net contributors, basically those who pay for the EU. And there, I think the most, the most thought of example was, for example, the Netherlands, which had elections only 2 or 3 weeks ago. And where there was a fear, let's say, would the Netherlands ever think about Brexit? But I think it's not on the cards because the party which won most is a very pro-European party. You have to see that those which often speak about leaving, like take Poland or take Hungary, basically get a lot from the EU. If they were to leave, they would be much worse off. So they basically can participate a lot in the rhetoric, like we've seen for both countries, Poland and Hungary. But in the end, they know they earn 2, 3, 4% of GDP from revenues, which coming from other EU countries, which basically contribute to help them out.
So financially, they can't afford to leave?
No. And the same applies basically for 2 other countries, but which are, Italy has become a bit more skeptic, at least some parties in Italy. But also Italy now and Spain will benefit a lot from what they call the post-crisis recovery resolution tool, which will help these countries massively to recover after the pandemic. And take Italy, which had this Lega Nord Salvini party, which was strongly rather against the euro, against the EU. I mean, no seas, let's say, that will have this money only if they remain members of the EU. And this is about 50 billion, imagine.
And Professor Hadfield, can you look in your crystal ball and tell me whether you think there will come a time when the UK will reapply to join the European Union, maybe a different, smaller European Union on different terms? Can you see that happening?
It rather depends what the European Union itself becomes. So my crystal ball, if I give it a good shake, suggests that Britain is not at this point in a position to work its way back to the union. And it's the institutions that seem to give it a positive allergy at this point. There's a real pathology between what the EU itself as a series of interlocking institutions represent versus the European member states. If the European Union, I think, shifts to something that is a little bit more loose, a bit more multi-level, which frankly, in many ways it already is, that there may be surface area in the next 20 or 30 years for Britain to be able to find a landing space to come back.
And Karel, would you agree with that?
I think, let's say, there will be other areas they will have to cooperate. Let's say this important defense review, which the UK had gone through, how important this is for Europe, because Britain has a very credible army, and rest of Europe can learn a lot from that. And we have to be aware, let's say, that Russia, but also other countries on the East, and take the Middle East, for example, what a message still is, that we need to have a clear, credible security umbrella and a kind of a defense threat, but we don't have it at the moment. And that's where we need to cooperate. And that's where, of course, some people say we have NATO, but in certain cases, like we had Libya only a few years ago, where the NATO didn't play a big role, and but Europe had to play a role. But in the end, let's say Europe has, certainly the follow-up hasn't done it well. And it's basically other actors in the Middle East which are taking up the security challenges, not Europe.
Karel Lannoo and Professor Amelia Hadfield, thank you both very much for joining us here on The Agenda.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.